9:34 exactly, news and views on Salam Media. Next, we are going to be talking with Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis. He's a legal expert. And of course, we are going to be unpacking private prosecutions through this interview. What is it? How does it work? How does it differ from public prosecution? And in this instance, regarding Zuma and his private prosecution, what are we dealing with? A very good morning to you, Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis. Thank you indeed for being with us. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, and nice to speak to you as well.
Okay, let me ask the first question then. What's the difference between a private prosecution and a public prosecution? And when we talk private prosecutions, who pays for it?
Right. Well, first of all, at this stage of proceedings, it's not a question of guilty or not guilty of any of the parties. In other words, it's only a procedural aspect. The question that usually arises is who is responsible for the prosecution? In terms of our government and in terms of our constitution, the state, in other words, the National Prosecuting Authority, is the primary responsible entity to ensure criminal prosecutions in this country. But there are exceptions to the rule. And in terms of Section 7 up to 17 of our Criminal Procedure Act, it happens from time to time where the state declines to prosecute a person because they don't seem to have so-called prima facie evidence to institute a prosecution. In which event, then it's open for the complainant to decide to take the matter further on his own, and that is what we call a private prosecution. Who pays for the private prosecution? Obviously, the person that wants to institute the private prosecution.
Okay.
What happens is that person must put up security at the clerk of the criminal court. He pays an amount, and that amount will then be paid out to the defense counsels for their legal expenses if the prosecution is unsuccessful. That is in a nutshell what a private prosecution is.
Okay, there are many legal eagles suggesting that this is a tactic being used by Zuma, the Stalingrad tactic, simply to try and exhaust the powers that be so that this doesn't go ahead, and also to buy time because his other cases, his criminal case is also looming. Would you believe that there is merit in those type of comments?
Yeah, this is our typical lawyer answer, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that definitely Zuma is playing for time. He's been using the so-called Stalingrad technique all along in his own prosecution. That we know for a fact. That's the reason why we have not ensured a finalization of his own prosecution after almost a decade. But on the other hand, remember when you are the complainant, and in this instance, he is the complainant, he has absolutely no benefit in stalling the matter before court. And I think that is the reason why we would rather have the matter be expedited against Ramaphosa, Billy Downer, and even McGowan, because let's just face it, the sooner he can implicate them and bring them before court, the sooner there will be a judgment. And if the judgment goes against Ramaphosa, for example, then obviously in terms of the ANC's own stand-aside rule, he must then at least provisionally stand down as state president, alternatively as leader of the party. So yes, there's definitely a political strategy on Zuma's side as well. If one looks at his timing when he filed the arraignment against Ramaphosa in just before the National Congress on the 15th, 16th of December, is very suspicious. One will have to obviously investigate his reasoning behind it, and be sure that the full bench of the court will not hesitate to ask exactly those kind of questions. But one must differentiate between political interventions here and the strict legal principles of the Criminal Procedure Act. Criminal Procedure Act is very clear. If one looks at what Advocate Elaine Zungu, the DPP of KZN, signed off on the 21st of November last year, it is clear that she signed a document suggesting that it was a Section 7.2 purported document, which is what is known as a nolle prosequi certificate. Exactly the requirement that Zuma needs to institute a prosecution against Billy Downer, McGowan, as well as Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, that being said, in that certificate, she used the words, in quotations, any person. She said specifically, she certified that she has read all the statements and affidavits on which the alleged charge is based, and the state declines to prosecute in connection with, on the instance of the state, on a charge of accessory after the fact. Now, the bottom line is, the words that she used is nothing but ambiguous and maybe a bit vague. One would have expected the state to mention the names of the people that the state declines to prosecute. Then there would have been absolute no doubt in anybody's mind. But being at it as it stands currently, it's a court that must interpret what is meant by so-called any person. Does that include Ramaphosa, as Zuma suggests, or does it exclude Ramaphosa, as Mr. Ramaphosa himself alleges? So that it's a question of the ambiguity, the vagueness in the certificate itself, which will be the crux of the interpretation and the issue before court in the full bench.
So when we look at that statement, accessory after the fact, how much of weight does it actually hold? Is that then suggesting perhaps that maybe, just maybe, because it is so vague, that Ramaphosa doesn't have to appear and stand, and it will only be Billy Downer and Karen Morn?
Look, I have to repeat my first comment. It's not a question of being guilty or not guilty of accessory after the fact or any other crime at this stage. It's a question of whether Zuma, on a legal principle, is entitled to have Ramaphosa before court. The mere fact that the courts already allowed Zuma to have Billy Downer and McGowan before court under exactly the same certificate suggests that at least some courts felt that there's merits in a possible private prosecution. And if that is the correct interpretation, then Cyril Ramaphosa must face the music as well. But on the other hand, if Ramaphosa is correct and stating, listen, the NDPP have confirmed that I am not to be regarded as one of those individuals under the heading any person as alleged in the nulli prosecution certificate. If that is the correct interpretation, then by all means, then there is no valid subpoena to have him before court, in which event he is within his rights not to appear on the 19th of January in the Gauteng High Court. But at the end of the day, the question then arises, if that is the situation, will it not be the correct stance from Zuma then to reapply for a nulli prosecution certificate against Cyril Ramaphosa, specifically by name, in which event we will see the exact same situation again in the near future, and we are then merely postponing the inevitable.
The chances of Cyril Ramaphosa then perhaps not appearing on the 19th, perhaps on the advice of his legal team, and really this is becoming it's becoming very tiring. Sorry, just repeat, what did you say?
I will be very hesitant if I were the president not to appear, because if he's wrong and if his legal advice is not sound, then a court can very well issue a warrant of arrest against Ramaphosa, and that will have a more detrimental effect on the president. I would rather appear and take the stance and say, listen, I'm doubtful whether this was a legal arraignment for me to be in front of court today, but Judge, please confirm that I should not be here. In which event the judge can merely say, I struck it from the roll, or the charges are withdrawn, or whatever the case may be. But at this stage, to take a risky stance and say, listen, I'm not satisfied with the document, and therefore I will not appear, is a bit risky if you ask me. There can absolutely be no harm for the president to appear and see what the courts has to say about it. If the courts agree with him, end of story, he can box your uncle, he can walk away. If not, well, at least then there will not be the risk of having a warrant of arrest being issued from the bench against him.
My final question then, and I know there are so many opinions, legal opinions, and of course layperson opinions as well around this case. What's your take on it? How do you see it playing out?
Okay, well, this is my personal opinion, obviously. But
Sure.
the principles on private prosecution is very simple. It's not even supposed to be a very difficult question before court. If Zuma is correct, in other words, if Ramaphosa could be considered as a possible accessory after the fact, and that is not the threshold is not very high. every person has the right to have his day in court and to make allegations against somebody else, to stand trial for allegations. It's for the court to decide whether guilt or innocence will follow at the end of the day. What will happen is Ramaphosa will be arraigned before court sometime. If not on this issue, on this matter by Zuma, be sure it will then follow on the Pala allegations against him. Because the mere fact that the Parliament disregarded the charges against him or is not willing to proceed with it does not mean that any other interested party cannot exactly do the same as Zuma and ask for a nolle prosecution certificate against Ramaphosa and have their day in court. And remember, after this decision, they will know exactly how to word such a document and certificate. So there will not be a second, let's call it then, flaw in the material preliminary procedure that will be followed before Ramaphosa appears. So what my opinion is that Ramaphosa himself is playing for time, and the inevitable will follow in due course.
And undoubtedly, the whole of South Africa is going to be watching this with bated breath. Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, legal expert, thank you indeed for being with us on the show this morning. We might even hook up with you when the case is in process and post the case itself. So lovely talking with you.
Thank you very much.
9:46 News and Views right here on Salam Media, and in a minute or two we are going to be talking with Zainul Akaji. He is the CEO of OCAF South Africa, so please do stay with us.